Jacob A. Riis was born on May 3rd in 1849. In Denmark, he trained as a carpenter with his father, but then he immigrated to New York in 1870. He worked at the New York police station as a journalist. In this time period in life, there were quite a bit of living issues in New York. He was fortunate enough to not deal with them, but there were a lot of lower income communities and other immigrants who were homeless, and their living situations were referred to as the ghettos of New York. He saw how those who were forced to live in these conditions were suffering, and seeing this made him want to enact change. So he taught himself how to be a photographer with some other people, and he hired other photographers to work with him. So he ended up creating this coffee table book called How the Other Half Lives, and this book was a compilation of photographs with images of people in their natural habitat. So not necessarily photojournalism, since he would go around and ask them to pose or show him how their living situations were. So there were more set up portrait photos and more environmental portraits. He did pay them though, so it wasn't completely using their situation for his gain. Here are some images. This one is titled "Street Children Sleeping Near a Grate on Mulberry Street." So this is an example of living conditions for children during that time. This is probably one of the most famous ones. It's a girl holding her younger sister in a doorway next to a garbage can, and this is showing what her house pretty much looked like. Here's a guy and another guy. You can barely see him on the left, and they're children, and they sleep inside the building of the newspaper company. And they were newspaper boys, and they didn't really have anywhere to live, so they would just sleep in the corner. This is probably one of the most famous images of his book. The Bayard Street tenant. You could fit up to 12 people in a room that was just 13 people long, so it was about a person per square foot, which is quite insane. Here's another famous one, an Italian person living on Jersey Street in 1890, holding her baby, showing how small her living condition is and the lack of actual living conditions. Here's another example. West 47th Street was just pretty much a larger room where a lot of women would just work and clean and sleep on the floor. There wasn't really any living things other than a larger room with that heater in the middle that barely worked. Here's another example. This is an example of that homeless man in the middle with women on the sides, and they're just hanging out trying to find jobs. And then this is another, this is the police station, similar to the 47th Street, where you would just huddle around a heater that doesn't work very well. And you would end up in the police station because you obviously had nowhere else to go. And then this is a very old one, one of his first. It was printed on wood, actually, and they gather in a tenant yard. So this would be in between really skinny houses, and this is where, they would all convene. And if you can see up on that ledge, there is a policeman, observing the situation. And so in the beginning, we talked about how he felt he needed to do something. And so the impact of this was that Teddy Roosevelt was the New York police commissioner at the time. And so he worked closely with him after he took all these photographs. And these photographs skyrocketed Teddy Roosevelt into making a larger change for living conditions, as well as boosting his political campaign for the Progressive Party presidential bid. So you can see President Roosevelt, John Hell Vincent, another member of the police department, and Jacob Riis in 1905. One of the only photographs of them that exist, just since photography wasn't as popular back then. But this, book, How the Other Half Lives, is a photography book, and simply that, not many words. There is a The larger book, which I own both, the larger book is just photographs, and then there's a book, the first edition of it, where it's mostly writing and then very, very low graphic stencils. But this is very much a form of social change through photography, and this inspires my career to do similar things.